Welcome to Rebuilding the Artist, a podcast that explores the intersection of identity, creativity, and mental health in the arts. I'm your host, Rashida Black, a therapist and former musician, here to help you navigate the pressures and challenges of a world that often demands perfection at the cost of well-being. This podcast is about reclaiming your sense of self between all of the expectations and harsh self-talk. Whether you're an artist or supporting a creative, join us as we explore building resilience and living authentically. Hi! I'm really excited for today's episode because it gets to the nucleus of what this podcast is all about. So, to set things off, let's first start by considering 2 points of view, okay? And you let me know, which approach do you most agree with? Here's the first. I have an identity. At least my friends and family seem to think so, but I'm not really sure who I am. I know that I'm more like some people than others, but sometimes this changes as I try out new identities. I don't really want to take on an identity if it means that I can't be different when I want to be. So that was the first viewpoint. Here's the second. I am who I am because of the time and place I was born and the culture in which I was raised. My family gave me a set of values, and so has my city, my religion, my community, and my country. Add these all up, and that's who I am. The overall question is, how do you know who you are? No matter which these approaches you take right now, by the end of this episode, you're going to hear how to reconcile any confusion you may have. But don't just skip to the end. Enjoy the journey of this podcast with me, okay? In the last episode, I mentioned Miley Cyrus, an interview where she talked about her struggles with body dysmorphia and mental health after playing Hannah Montana. And I can't remember if she was an 11-year-old portraying a 16-year-old. The constant wigs and heavy makeup distorted her self-perception for years, right? It's when we think about I want to call them victims, but the little contestants of toddlers and tiaras. And so, the experience is a perfect example of today's topic. How do our adolescent selves clash with the identities that others impose on us, right? And we're taking this perspective from a young artist who is kind of conditioned, programmed to look for external validation. We always have to put ourselves on this kind of auction block to open ourselves up to criticism from a very young age, because we're being judged from a very young age if we start early. Right? Whether we're entering competitions directly with adjudicators or if we're just in front of audiences, everyone's a critic. And that has a deep impact on who we think we are and how we develop that sense of self. Now, Miley was able to heal and reflect on her identity crisis in a healthy way, which ultimately helped her understand herself better. And that's the goal. We all face moments of identity crises, many actually, throughout our lives. And it doesn't have to be just in our careers. It could be in our relationships or even in our art forms. The challenge is navigating through those moments without losing ourselves. And so when we're young, we're still trying to figure it out. That process can be warped by how others perceive us and whatever their motivations are. If we have a family who is kind of dependent on, let's say, us winning that competition money, then there's an added pressure. Then we have to be the one that helps our family, saves our family, adds to how we see ourselves. Since we all go through things like this, and I'm I'm just exploring, how do we do this in a way that considers that individual, that person, so that we can approach this with empathy and compassion and acceptance. Because usually we are pressured and we snap. Everybody has had those moments where we're just kind of like, I cannot take this anymore, And it could be kind of a quiet snap. One of my little identity crises, I was so tired of being, this like harpist angel Barbie. And I was like, I need to exercise my autonomy. I pierced my tongue. And then I spent the next year talking through my teeth in order to hide it from authority figures. Oh my goodness. That was my defiance, a painful one at that. So the problem, right, with how we represent and talk about our identity shifts makes us feel like we're the messed up ones. Like the finished versions of the people we see around us, they've always been like that. They've never gone through what I go through. And I'm here to tell you, if you're experiencing something like that, we all go through that. Some hide it better than others. Certainly better than me talking through my teeth. We all go through it. And we all have multiple identities that change depending on the context that we're in. So let me tell you about some of the identities where we could have these crises. I mentioned a few, but I'm just going to reiterate for context. We have a gender identity, racial identity, religious identity, class identity, political identity, cultural identity, sexual identity, ethnic identity. Hell, we even have a regional, a generational identity, a national identity, along with our professional identities, which those of us who started early in the arts have sooner than some of our other identities. And each of these plays a role in shaping who we are when we really start thinking about how those identities impact our lives. So I just want to break down a couple of other things. First, there's that self-identity, and that's how we see ourselves. And that forms the core of who we are, and it's influenced by our environment, by our experiences. Then we have our social identity, and that's how others see us. And as we all know, sometimes those two don't always match. And once we recognize both of them, we have to acknowledge how they intersect. And that's where intersectionality comes in. And so that's the concept that reminds us that our identity isn't just about one label or one category. It's shaped by a lot of different factors. And each of us has our unique blend of identities, however we kind of prioritize them. There's a hierarchy. And then also how those identities intersect and influence how we navigate the world. So when we're growing up in the arts, we are sometimes told we have to learn the rules in order to break them. We don't always get permission to do that. Instead, we feel a lot of pressure to conform, to follow the path that's laid out by our teachers or our mentors. And so then we start to wonder, when do we get to decide who we are? And that is really tricky. One of the last arguments I had on Facebook before I quit was about Iggy Azalea. Do y'all remember her? I found her so fucking fake. I felt like she was just an example of the industry mocking my culture. And I remember, how she was just catching a lot of heat for kind of adopting an accent that didn't match her background, let's say. And I think part of the conflict for me was this isn't for her. And she's not doing it in a respectful way. It really burnt my cookies. And then I got pushback. A person I went to high school and college with was like, well, you play Debussy. It's like, yeah, I perform the music of this person. I'm not trying to be Debussy. And I'm also not purporting that I am Debussy, but his comment helped me understand how I was being perceived, that my Black identity clashed with what others expected from a classical musician. I was the fake in the room. And I was like, oh, this is some bullshit. Growing up, I danced. I did ballet, tap, jazz. And even as a kid, I was serious about it, right? And I remember, I may have been like 3 or whatever. And my other little dancers were just trying to be cute, but they didn't know their steps. They were, in my space, stepping on my toes. And I'm like, get it together, girl. I had some serious Debbie Allen and Fame vibes. I was, But as soon as I realized that dancing could hurt me, I may have been like in tumbling or whatever. I rolled off the mat. I hit my head so hard on the floor. I was like, that's it for me. I'm done. I quit. And then maybe just a couple of years later, I started playing harp and piano. And even though harp hurt my fingers, I felt a connection to the music, and that's what kept me going. And so by my teens, when people start locking themselves into stereotypes, I faced like my first major identity crisis. I was about 14, and by this time I had moved away from home, and I was really focused on learning music. But I had moved from an all-Black environment to an all-white environment to support my art, and growing in that career direction, in that profession. And I remember anybody who's under the age of, let's say, 35 is not going to know this, but I remember using a payphone. Okay. I called home, probably collect. And I told my mother, I need to come home. And I said these words exactly. I'm losing my identity. I need to come home. Because home is where I would have recharged. But my mother is like, you're on a path, you're on a quest, you have a mission and a goal. You really need to follow through. You really need to see through. And I get the value that she was importing. I get it. I get what she was doing. But neither of us really understood that that was a critical moment for me, like a major crisis, kind of a downward slope into some severe mental illness. And later, substance use issues. It was a slippery slope, and I was on it. And all moments of crisis can either help us to kind of secure a strong identity or leave us vulnerable to insecurity. And so this is where kind of those social influences can blur the lines between who we truly are and who others expect us to be. My environment was very influential and foreign to me and how I grew up, but it informed where I was going. Society influences, obviously, teens and how they see themselves. And of course, identity development, it varies by culture, by context. And I didn't consciously realize it at the time, but I was seeking out something that felt like home. So I remember going to an open rehearsal with the Boston Symphony, and I ran up to the stage because I saw me. The principal harpist at the time was a Black woman. And I was like, that's me in the future. I'm so excited. This is amazing. So I ran up to the stage to introduce myself to who would later become my teacher. And I was responding, though, to something that was deeper than her skills. Black orchestral harpist. And, I'm a Black girl wanting to play symphonic music. And that reflection was enough to give me a little bit of breathing room it is possible. I won't be alone forever. I'm not alienated. I can do this. That started to help secure an identity. And that's how identity works, right? We need to see someone else, someone we admire, doing what we dream of in order to feel at home in our own bodies. And so for me, that person on that stage was an example that validated my path. And it's such a double-edged sword, right? Because then instead of continuing to be alongside and develop my own identity, I morphed into hers instead. Wow. Because I still wasn't solid in who I was. And so that was, a moment just showing how easily we can lose our sense of self when adopting identities that are handed to us by others, right? I was so shaped by her presence, by her expectations, and how she was showing me how to navigate the world that we were in this classical music world. And she had her own struggles, and she would tell me about it. She was often criticized for being too strong of a performer. And so harpists were expected to be, soft and dainty or whatever, gentle. But she wasn't. And therefore, I wasn't either. We were playing to be heard above 100 other instruments on that stage in that performance hall, not to be mic'd. And our identities didn't fit necessarily. They were respected, but they weren't ideal. So anyway, how then do we find and maintain our true selves when our environment, when society is constantly trying to define us? I kept wondering that. Not only who am I, but how do I get to be who I truly am? Nobody is saying hey, you should really be you more often. It was be this because this is what wins competitions, or this is what helps you excel. And that's maybe not you. We know what wins. This is the formula. Do this instead. Most of us don't get the space for exploration. Then later we feel resentment for not having had the chance to decide for ourselves. That exploration stage, especially, during our adolescence, is necessary. It can be exciting. It's also dangerous. But if we're not just out to rebel against authority, then we would give ourselves the opportunity to question the identities that others are trying to impose on us. The challenge is finding maybe some adults around us that can help to guide and support us, especially when we're at risk of losing touch with who we are. And so, kind of as we explore our identities, it's really important that we remain connected to the parts of ourselves that we really truly love, even if society is pressuring us to move in a different direction. We also have to remember that because our identities are intersectional, they're not just one thing, that they're a blend of a lot of other things, that denying that complexity can also lead to, let's call it, some self-denial. So how can young artists explore or reclaim their identities? In a previous episode, I gave you kind of insight into some of my journal entries, right? And I love journaling because it's kind of like a talking book. Shout out to Stevie Wonder. And it allows you to see yourself, to be introspective and reflective, and to ask yourself open-ended questions. The where, what, and how questions, like, where do I see myself now? And as I explore, where do I see myself going? What I will say is, if you can just use a little bit of visualization, if I'm on this same path or doing the things that I'm currently doing right now, where do I see myself going? What are some likely outcomes doing what I'm currently doing? And if I change some things up, does that affect the outcomes? These questions are meant to help you figure out for yourself the who am I and what do I want? Where do I want to go? We're absolutely going to be influenced by other people. However, we can choose who we're influenced by, and we can choose what we're influenced by. You don't have to listen to that entire reel. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to read that story. You can choose. There are many different teachers you can learn from, okay? And when you find the ones that align with you, then talk to them about these questions too. Be aware that sometimes they'll try to steer you down their path because it was successful for them. But you will know a quality mentor or a teacher or a guide when they ask you questions about your vision, your mission, your values, your passions. They can say, well, this is what I did based on time and space. That's what worked for me. But you are different from me. So let's see what works for you. That's a good teacher. That's a great parent. This is what I did. And that was cool. Here's some of the skills that are kind of like the foundation of how I was able to do what I do. Usually, those are the folks who understand how identities work, how they intersect, and then also how you can maximize your particular set of identities in order to keep moving forward. Let's say you've got some identities that are considered valuable in whatever time and space you currently exist. What are you going to do with that power? How are you going to use your privilege? It's so interesting to me. As a Black harpist, I was often objectified. And sometimes I felt the burden of that. I didn't want those identities projected onto me. But I did recognize that because I was objectified and people wanted the look of me somewhere, that I also had access. I could tell a different story. I could show something else. Maybe not what they wanted, but what I felt was important. And I used that privilege to empower some young people who would come to me. And that's probably what made me realize, like, I'm going to be a good therapist someday. Right? Like, those are those moments, me being an unofficial social worker, that, when I'm teaching music to a child who said, I didn't have a chance to practice because our lights went out. We didn't have any power. And I'm like, yeah, I've been there. And my wonderfully creative mother lit candles. And she was still like, you're going to practice this instrument, right? I never got off the hook there. It was, you're still going to do this thing. That's my mother. So I'm practicing by candlelight, but also I would sometimes close my eyes to see, can I feel this, right? I don't have to see it. Can I feel it? Can I visualize what's happening? Can I do this without my sight? And it was really different kind of skill set, but it helped me build resilience. See what I'm saying? And so then part of my identity is that I know that I'm resilient because of these experiences, and I know that I can keep going. And so a teacher who is thinking about you is not going to, you didn't practice, for shame, you're not going to get any better. Instead, what I did was, that's really hard. I'm sorry. Let's see how we can take what you are experiencing, take what you have right now, and help you to keep moving forward in your life. We're not going to let this set us back, but we are going to integrate these experiences and let it fortify us and make us stronger. That's how we develop that secure identity. Maybe sometimes you need that, maybe sometimes you don't. That's fine, but just know that you have it like a tool in your toolbox. It's there. And so a good teacher, a good mentor, and even you being good to yourself means no biases. Everybody's got a stake in what you do and who you are. That's fine. And of course, when other people are affected, they're going to try to control. But ultimately, you got to live with you for the rest of your life. So how do you preserve yourself? I think if you maybe, are looking around in your immediate environment and you don't necessarily see folks who are doing exactly what you're doing, it's okay to look outside, read some books, have heroes that inspire you. Look for the qualities and traits that you admire and see if that's an aspiration for you. Access it within yourself through your actions. Do you know what I mean? I feel like this is one of the things that I wish I had known, is to source various characteristics and traits, qualities from other people, knowing that even what I see is not the totality of someone. What I see may be some perfect version, but I don't know their other identities. I don't know what their struggles are, so I can't compare myself. There's no competition. But what I see, I can take a little bit of that and say, I like this. I'm going to try to find that quality within myself and try to bring it to the fore so that it becomes one of my more dominant identities. Things like patience, for example. It's a skill. It needs practice. But I know that we all have this, and I know I can make it stronger within myself. Patience with myself when I'm making mistakes. I used to throw my metronome across a practice room like, I can't do this. I'm so frustrated. I'm crying at my heart. It was so sad, so melodramatic. And at the same time, that I would get up, go get that metronome, put the batteries back in it. Just said, okay, I'm going to try again. I'm going to do this. I'm going to keep working at this until I get it. That became a core part of my identity. So all of that informed how I see myself. It may not inform how others see me. People would say, oh, you make this look so effortless. Well, I'm glad that has the look of it. That's certainly not my reality. I work hard at this. But at the same time, that's the part that I feel like, I'm glad that it looks effortless, right? But don't mistake that to mean I'm not putting in effort or that this is somehow natural for me. You can work hard at something and maybe what you do can be effortless too. But having those conversations instead of assuming that this is the case, that this is what's real, is necessary. And then also, I've been around people who want that identity. Like, oh yeah, this is just what I do. No, it's not. And that kind of makes them look kind of supernatural. And I think they love that illusion, but it does a disservice, especially to younger folks who are trying to learn and grow and develop and evolve. We need to be transparent about our hard work. We need to be transparent about our processes. And right now, I'm really speaking to the teachers, the parents who are listening. We need to tell our stories of how we got through something. That's enough for today. Ultimately, just a little recap. Self and social identities constantly evolving, and that's okay. It's just about recognizing who you are in all of the noise, and finding a way to stay true to that, even when the world tries to define you for their benefit. Which of your identities have shifted over time? That's what I want to know. And I don't just mean that you were wearing your overalls backwards during the 90s, because everybody did. I'm talking about who you believed yourself to be, like inside. And then later was like, maybe I was at that time, but I didn't really feel as authentic as maybe I learned that I am. Here's how I found out. And I knew, because a sense of peace and contentment came over me. It wasn't performative. It was just, I'm home in myself. That's what I want to hear about. Email me at podcast@kimora.com. Talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Rebuilding the Artist. We hope today's conversation left you feeling inspired, connected, and more in tune with your creative self. Remember, this journey is about progress, not perfection. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with fellow artists who need to hear these stories. You can also follow us on Instagram at Kimora Wellness for more insights and updates. That's Kimora Wellness, Khemura Wellness. Join us next time as we continue to explore what it means to rebuild and heal as an artist. Until then, keep creating, keep questioning, and above all, keep showing up for yourself. You are the artist. You are the storyteller of your life.